Check, 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 check. Check 1, 2. Check, check, check.
Good evening.
Hi.
How's everybody doing tonight?
Pretty good.
Cool.
Pretty good.
All right. So last week I asked you to come to class with two websites that you like. One where you like the sort of one where you like the design, where you like the form of it, and one where you like the feel, the function of it. So I'm going to go down in order of my attendance sheet, which is alphabetical by last name. So first up is Sarah. You can just drop your links in the chat here.
Okay, thank you. One second.
Sure. Okay. So all right, we will start with your first link. So this is the one where you like the form of it, the layout.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so nice. We've got a video background going on. We've got okay, we have one of these little chat widgets that pops up after a certain amount of time passes. And then okay, so this is for a hard kombucha or something. So we're gonna say we're over 21. Cool. Okay. Right off the bat, I appreciate this sort of look that emulates like old sort of like, you know, the big chunky design of like older operating systems. Sort of hinting at that, not quite going all the way full, you know, OS X for or you know, Mac OS 1 Chicago font, etc. But we're hinting at that, which is a nice touch. Okay, and then all right, we have kind of a all right, we've got some stuff scrolling in different directions as we move past. Does anything scroll across the top? Yeah. Okay, cool. So it scrolls it kind of does like a snake thing where it scrolls all the way around that box. That's pretty cool. And cool. And we have like this kind of okay, yeah, it's kind of it's not quite a masonry layout because these are the same, because all these sort of content areas are the same size, but we have this kind of tile layout that starts it's sort of like, you know, these grids where things are 2 by 2, and then once we get down into the flavors, it's 4 by 4. We have kind of okay, so there's a shopping cart as well. Okay, cool. Cool. Let's take a look at this with the let's take a look at this in the inspector, put it into and see how it translates to a responsive, see how it looks in more of a responsive mode. So when we shrink it down, okay, gotcha. All right. Oh, this is cool. Yeah, so it so yep, the kind of the sort of like 2 by 2 tiles just become 1 column. We still get this okay, we still get that kind of scrolling snake border thing. That's a really cool touch. That's something I'm gonna save this site for later and see if I can figure out how they did that, because that's like that's a really sweet little touch. But okay, so let's take a look up here. All right, and as we scroll back out, we get, okay, so that goes down to 2 by 2. As we scroll back out, we get, all right, right around the sort of upper end of tablet size. Once we're bigger than like 1024, we get back to our sort of our original layout here. So do you think of this as a do you think this is a mobile first layout or a desktop first layout?
Desktop first.
Yeah, I think so too, because we can see that the and sort of like, I think the big tell here is really in the in sort of this top content bar. As we once we scroll down to, so yeah, right around here, like I think the breakpoint is going to be 768. Let's see. A little hard to tell. It's somewhere, okay, it's somewhere in that ballpark. It's a little less, but it's somewhere in that ballpark. We get this sort of like hero part gets much bigger once we cross down to tablet size, and the whole top bar kind of changes. We get this big CTA here, and we get this this hamburger menu as opposed to the nav links that we get once we cross back up into desktop size. Cool. So yeah, we're actually going to be once we get into CSS positioning, and in particular the CSS grid, that sort of like will go a long way. I'm pretty sure that that's at first glance, not even having looked at source, just first glance of looking at the layout, I'm pretty sure that they're using the CSS grid display mode to do the to handle this kind of like tile layout thing. And that's something we're going to go over. We're also going to go over things like we're going to go over things like working with media, working with video, and including video as a background element is one thing that we can look into. I'm going to potentially sort of like slot that in on a day, either on a like a lab day, and just kind of like go over sort of any loose end stuff, or I might slot it into one of the lessons that we have coming up. Okay, so now let's look at your let's check out your functional one. I'm gonna go with the first one you sent, this ueno.com .co.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, so tell us what this is a site for. Is this a
Yeah, they're like a creative agency, and my boyfriend actually showed me this one, but what's really cool about it is like if you go on the homepage and then like minimize the screen, the text actually reformats with the screen in like a really, like a very logical way where the text doesn't become like too small.
okay, let's yeah, let's take a look at that.
And there's like, if you scroll to the bottom, like yeah, like right there, like where it says like go up a little bit. Sorry.
Here, this
like,
the selected projects header.
Up more. Yeah, that part.
Okay.
If you start minimizing it there. Wait, no.
It probably.
I was doing it on like a window, like Chrome window, but like.
Okay, let me see what happens
yeah.
if I just it should be functionally the same, but let's see what happens if I Yeah, so I'm just redoing the browser window now.
Yeah.
Well, tell you what, this is Firefox. Let's see if it looks differently in Chrome as I minimize. Because you will find that different browsers render styles slightly differently. So even if like sort of by the end of the if by maybe this by the time it gets to this point it looks pretty much the same, but like as it minimizes it might work differently. So I'll just do this. I will switch over to just viewing everything in Chrome from here on out.
Or we can
Okay.
also try clicking into a project. But pretty much he was telling me how like the font size proportionally changes with the browser width. So it's like more about like the font resizing.
Okay. Yeah.
Like if you go into that routers.
Writers.
app,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
And then sort of like, okay, yeah, I see what you're talking about how sort of like, well, actually, I don't really see the font size changing.
Yeah, so it's just changing at like a very minimal like rate versus like other sites. So it's like more fluid.
Let's hang on a sec. Let's pop the inspector open. Let's make sure we're looking at that element. Font size. Okay. Yep. All right. So yeah. So there is a what's going on is there's a relative unit of measure being used here. We'll come back to what we'll come back to how this works once we start spending more time in setting font sizes in CSS once we cover that. But basically what we're doing here is we're doing a calculation based on the width of the viewport. This 1.212 VW is a relative unit of measure that stands for that gives you a percentage of the width of the viewport. VW stands for viewport width. There's viewport width and viewport height. And so we're performing a calculation where we have we can take two values that are in different units of measure, one that's in a relative unit where it's a proportion, and one that's in pixels, and we can add them together and compute a value. And we can just set a CSS rule that'll let us do that on the fly. That's what this calc means in this line right here. So then as I resize, there is going to be a very subtle difference in the change of in the change of the font size. I think you can see it getting a little bit smaller here, but very, very slightly, because it's just doing a little bit of a percentage on top of a fixed pixel pixel size. Let's see, where'd that rule I was looking at go? Okay. All right. That actually, where does that kick back in? So now it's gone down to just 26 pixels, like a fixed unit. Let's see where that calc came back in. Okay, min width 375, right? So and let's see. So our bottom end is 375 pixels, and let's see where that drops back out. $537, 5. Okay, it looks like it's just anything, yeah, okay, so that's still in effect. So just at any screen size larger than 375 pixels, we get at as long as the screen is 375 or larger, we do that calculation. Anything smaller than that, we just do a fixed pixel size. This is what's called a media query. We're going to get to this much later, but basically the media query is what is kind of like the driving force, the enabling force behind that lets us do build responsive designs. It's kind of a meta rule declaration that allows us to specifically state that we want to target that, like, we want to write rules that are only going to apply when the screen is a certain size. So we'll and then because you notice sort of like here in this rule, it says media min width equals 375, and we have that font size, like the font size 26 pixels is canceled out. And here where it says font size calc, et cetera, that's the one that's in effect. Whereas as soon as I drag this to less than 375 pixels, we go back to yeah, once we get to less than 375 pixels, that rule doesn't apply anymore. But stepping back, let's just go back to looking at it sort of at a more of a normal desktop size. What do we think this one is? Do we think this is mobile first or desktop first design?
Desktop.
That's where I'm leaning as well, but let's take a look. Let's take again, the tell is usually going to be in sort of this title bar across the top, right? So let's see what happens with that as we yep. So once we sort of go below a certain size, everything gets folded into this hamburger menu. Whereas once we jump back out to about here, so again, our breakpoint is going to be somewhere in, like, probably my guess is like the 900 to 1,000 pixel range. That's where these links pop back into place. And all of a sudden this actually remains pretty. So this actually has kind of elements of both mobile first and desktop first, right? Because these links are here and only visible on desktop, where they're kind of like quick links. You don't need to dive into the hamburger menu to get to them. But even at a smaller size, when those are gone, the hamburger menu's layout is relatively unchanged. It becomes one column instead of two columns, but it's all the same content. So there's actually, this one's actually a little tricky. There's kind of elements of both desktop first and mobile first design going on here. That's really interesting. I'm kind of thanks for bringing this one up. I'm going to stash this one for later and poke around with it some more. Maybe bring this up, maybe, use this as an example to try and stump people in later classes. Cool. Okay. Thanks. Miri, you're up next.
So for the functional one, I did Zenny.
Okay.
Glasses.
Oh yeah. What's the URL again?
I put it in the chat.
Oh, you did. Okay.
It's just got this really, really cool. Oops, sorry. It's got this really cool like way you can try on the glasses.
Oh yeah, I think I've seen that.
And you just like open it up and it scans your face, and like lets you try on stuff. But on top of that, the interface is just crazy. You can get so hyper specific in here that I don't even really understand how they do it.
Okay. You know, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do that with the webcam on.
Yeah, I don't
You know,
know
with
if you can do it on Zoom.
Right.
But even when you go into kind of any of the styles, like you can filter by so many different things. And I think just the way it's like so hyper organized is pretty crazy.
Yeah. Cool. Let's just try. Yeah, let's just jump in here to shop new arrivals. Okay, right off the bat though, what are you thinking in terms of mobile first versus desktop first? What's your gut feeling on this one?
I think that it was probably mobile first.
Okay. Why is that?
Only because the functionality works, I find, much more cohesively on mobile.
Really? Okay. Oh, like the try-on tool does?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Well,
maybe that's because phone cameras are just like more intuitive to use.
Yeah, it's the phone camera is embedded at is like embedded at a native level in a way that it's not even with like the built-in camera on a laptop. That's still interfacing through the board into the board as a peripheral. It's much more so that there's not that much difference between, say, the built-in webcam, like as far as your computer's motherboard is concerned, there's not that much difference between the webcam that's built into your computer or a USB one that you plug in. Whereas with your phone, the webcam is more closely tied to being it's more closely tied to the motherboard and its connection. So you're right. The integration of the device at the device level is a lot is kind of a lot snappier on a phone. But in terms of the design of the site itself, once I shrink it down, the header look, this header looks completely different. We have everything sort of like shrinks into a hamburger menu. On the left, we have our logo that brings us back to the homepage, and then we have some sort of like top icon links, and everything sort of like truncates down to one column, right? Whereas with some of the tools still in place, like sort of like that color picker tool was still there. On like right here, we have sort of like a color picker that we can use to sort of like preview styles in different colors, or preview what the lenses look like or the frames look like in different colors. But as I pull this back out to desktop size, the layout changes pretty radically. All of a sudden, instead of sort of tile boxes, we have these carousels that allow us to sort of tab through left and right. These are a feature that sort of like you don't really, that can be a little, especially sort of for something this size, it would just be clumsy to keep it in a carousel on mobile, and have to keep sort of tabbing one at a time through sort of about, what are these, about a dozen, something like that. We also have these we have more links visible. All these top links get sort of like subsumed into the hamburger menu on mobile. And I think that not all of these even, I think that some of these, I think that the only ones we saw were like search, favorites, and cart without their sort of without their caption text, Let's take a look back. Let's drag it closed again and see. Yeah, so just those, which ostensibly means that the profile and help pages are, yep, all those get wrapped into here as well. So I would call this very much a desktop first design. Because we're starting with a design where at a large resolution, there's lots of information on the screen. And then as we move to a smaller resolution, a lot of that stuff gets sort of like pulled out of view. if we were starting with something that had, you know, if there was basically not a lot of, you know, if basically all this stuff was still in the same hamburger menu over to the left, and these were the only 3 icons we saw here on the right, you know, this search, favorite, and cart, that would be more indicative of a mobile first design. But your instinct about the tool being more the actual fitting tool being more optimized for mobile than for desktop is a good one. That's just sort of and you're probably right about that. So this was a tricky pick, and your observations were not incorrect. It was just looking at something at the wrong thing in this case, in terms of just what I was expecting from, you know, this assignment. But still, but you know, that's not to say, you know, that's not to say that's a bad thing. Your observations are definitely still on point. Okay, cool. So then what was your second website choice?
So I didn't really have one where like I was super impressed with the cool stuff that happened on the website, but I really like the design of this website. It's fairly simple. I just really like how the carousels move and like how everything sort of like functions. But it's just like a simple photographer's website.
Okay. Those can be yeah, these portfolio sites that are really simple layout wise can still be sort of like when your layout's really simple, it lets your content really pop and do all the communicating for you, you know?
Yeah.
So let's go in here. Okay. So
it's kind of to scroll through, but I really liked how it worked.
Yeah, this is nifty. This kind of scrolling tricks are always really that's always a really slick touch. Just so that other folks can tell, I'm scrolling my mouse wheel up and down, but instead of the page moving vertically, it's scrolling horizontally. So there's some JavaScript action happening here to take us a scroll on the x-axis and move it over to the y-axis. And it seems like that's pretty that's a really neat little interaction piece of interaction design. Yeah. Cool. Let's see how it, and there's not very many pages, just sort of copyright, share, contact, images, and sort of et cetera, et cetera. It's a very, very straightforward, just sort of like these kind of very, very simple, minimal designs work particularly well for artist portfolios, because this is a situation where the emphasis really needs to be on the content, right? Like we really want to focus on these images, and we don't want, and so we want the design to be intriguing, but also sort of like stay out of the way of the content to an extent. So simpler is definitely better. Like this is a very, very simple layout that has one little bit of flash to it, you know, one little bit of flair, one little bit of sort of flourish.
What I also found interesting about this one is that if you go to shop, it kind of takes you like to a totally different place, and you actually can't get back. So like if you click back, you can go back, but if you go home again, it doesn't take you there anymore. It's like a totally different homepage. Exactly. That makes sense, because a lot of folks kind of build if this is like a custom built portfolio page, there's a chance that sort of like once you get into the point of setting up a storefront, you're going to go through a provider, like some kind of provider, like a like a Square or a Shopify or something like that. Because getting approved to set up credit card transactions is like sort of something that's enterprise level business stuff. So
it's pretty common to have sort of like the portfolio stuff on one site, and then once it goes to a shop, that links away to a separate storefront site where so that like you can have all your sort of custom design on living in one place, and then all the sort of like all the storefront stuff living somewhere else. Because setting up storefronts is, I've worked on an e-com site integrating credit card stuff, and there's a lot of, I think sort of, it's not as bad as say legal or medical or pharmaceutical type industries, but it's up there in terms of like kind of the hoops you have to go through in order to get approved to do credit card transactions. So that's why a lot of storefronts are like sort of set up through third parties or like companies that do all the storefront management for you, and you just create an account,
Mhm.
But let's just see what happens when we pull this down to mobile size. Okay, so we're looking at another desktop first design here. That's not particularly surprising in this case. The nav sort of folds into a hamburger menu, and we retain that neat horizontal scroll trick. Cool. Let's just let me see what happens if I refresh at this size. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Let's try so that's just resizing. Let's try actually putting it in mobile device mode and seeing what happens. One thing that's worth noting is that there is a difference between just resizing your browser window versus using this device mode, because when a page loads, there are certain the browser sends certain headers when it requests the content, and those headers include information about which browser and which device you're using. So you can detect, that's part of how those like sort of sites like Wikipedia or Facebook that serve a different, like an m.facebook.com or an m.wikipedia.org, as opposed to just, where it's a separate page. The reason it knows that is because when your browser sends a request, it actually includes a little bit of information about itself, so that the server knows what type of information to return. When you just resize the browser window, the request still appears to have been from a desktop browser. Whereas when you go into mobile mode and toggle the device toolbar and set, and pick say iPhone 6, 7, 8, it does what the browser does what's called spoofing the header, which is where it sets in the request, it sets the request header to appear as though the request is actually coming from an iPhone 6, as opposed to just desktop Chrome and then sizing it down. That's an extremely nitpicky detail that in practice, we're not going to have to worry at all about things like setting request headers or things like that. But just so that going forward, there is a difference between just resizing the browser window and actually picking this sort of like picking a device in this mobile device toolbar. And this is going to give you a more accurate depiction of what a page would look like on a real device. But cool. All right, cool. Thank you. So Chloe?
Yep, let me send you the link right now.
Sure.
Okay, so the second one's not that interesting, but I just thought it always serves the right purpose and function, so I chose Street Easy.
Okay. Let's let's check out Tom Sachs Rocket Factory first. Just a second. Let me
Yeah, so basically Tom Sachs is a artist, which I follow, and he recently launched his first NFT collection, and I guess it's kind of fitting that we talk about NFT now because, you know, everyone's so into it now. And basically this was his launch website, and I thought aesthetically it was very in line with him as like a real life artist.
Hmm.
Everything was hand drawn by him or
Cool.
his team. And I just thought the website looked really pretty. And then when you click into the different tabs, like a little rocket comes out and like it's in motion, or like, or maybe that only happens in mobile. Oh yeah, this thing. Yeah, the loading.
Oh,
and
that
then
little
the
loading
rocket comes out.
spinner. Cool.
Yeah, the loading spinner. I really liked that. And then he also had like a YouTube video attached to it, and then a calendar.
Okay.
Um,
Oh yeah, so I see the video here. It's kind of like
Yeah.
super vertical. um
yes.
this is cool. I'm a big fan. I'm always a big fan of um hand-drawn aesthetic stuff.
Mhm. Yeah.
In the context of the web.
Yep. And
I
I just thought like it looked really pretty because like he didn't really try that hard to perfect it in a way where like everything looks very like tech, like high tech.
right.
You know what I mean? But I thought it really
Right.
fits his brand.
Yeah, it has a very handmade
Like
aesthetic.
raw, yeah.
Mhm. Okay. So if you have are we looking at a desktop first or a mobile first design here?
Probably desktop, I'm guessing.
Yep. Okay, what makes you guess desktop? You're right, but what you're thinking?
I'm thinking that because the little components and the arrows, they all go like horizontally.
Let's see. Which components are you talking?
Um,
The like sort of these
Yeah,
design
these ones.
elements.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, the design elements, the layout of it.
sure, it goes into a single column as opposed to sort of being two columns.
Yeah,
There's actually an even bigger there's a
indicator.
yeah, there's an even bigger tell. Just watch the toolbar across the top. As I toggle into mobile, all of the
Yeah.
links disappear and go into a hamburger menu.
Ah,
That's like sort of, if there's information that gets hidden once you go to mobile, that's a big
Mhm.
indicator that you're looking at a desktop first design as opposed to a mobile first design. On a mobile
Right.
first design, what you see on mobile would look pretty much this, things might expand out to multiple columns, but the actual content is pretty much
Mhm.
going to be the same, that like displayed more or less the same way
Right.
on mobile versus on desktop. The same things will be hidden inside menus. The same things will be visible on landing.
Right.
But cool. This is this is a neat little site. The idea of sort of NFTs that kind of generate that sort of lead to components of other NFTs kind of reminds me of, there was a project called CryptoKitties that was
Oh yeah.
yeah, I think they were kind of they were the ones that kind of like originated that whole thing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. And the other one that you said you wanted to look at was
Just Street Easy. I just like
All
going
right.
on the Street Easy website because I think like functionality, it's like so easy to use and navigate around the site, and like you just like hit all of your like filters, like boom boom boom, and then like everything just shows up.
Gotcha.
I think basically it's like a really ugly website, but
Yeah, it's
for
very much a tool. Like,
yeah.
let's okay. Yeah, and there's like, sort of when things are in this. Yeah, so I have a feeling that once we just sort of like, I have a feeling that once we get down to mobile size, I have a feeling that this stuff, we have kind of two bars here, right? This top bar that has like the sign in and the logo, and then this
Mhm.
lower nav that has the search bar and all these links. I have a feeling that
Mhm.
all of this is going to get, this whole second bar is going to get subsumed into like a hamburger menu or some kind of like toggle it, some kind of toggle.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
that's exactly what happened. Yep.
Yeah.
But
So
okay.
I have a question, like for a mobile version like this, because they also have like a mobile app, and I feel like it
Sure.
looks exactly like the mobile browser version. Like the way you design a mobile interface versus like an app, would you say it's like quite similar because of the sizing?
Yeah, I think that I would say that the concerns are the same.
Right.
That sort of like you know, whether we're in a mobile web page or a native app, the concerns around things like laying out this form are going to be basically the same in one place or the other.
Yeah.
There are obviously obviously in terms of building them, the code can be pretty substantially different.
Got it.
Although there are solutions for taking, and there have been for some time, that allow you to use HTML and CSS and
Mhm.
then compile that down to run as like a native phone application.
Right.
But in terms of things like, say, like accessing accessing device APIs, as in say like location or camera or a
Yeah.
microphone or things like that, that's if you're doing it through a browser, you're always going to be doing, there's always going to be kind of like the layer of the your code asks the browser for permission, then the browser asks the device for permission. When you're building natively, you don't have that extra layer, right? You can just go straight when you're building native Swift or Objective-C code for more likely Swift at this point. Objective-C is kind of ancient, but if you're building a native iOS app, you don't have to do that extra layer of you can just access the camera or the microphone or the GPS directly.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
which leads to which then allows for different features that you can't do with web, with HTML, which then open up different design concerns. There's information that you can access and present in a mobile application that you just can't through so they're very similar up to a point. And then once you hit that point of sort of like how deeply integrated you need to get, things can diverge really, really wildly.
Okay, got it.
Cool. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, for sure. Henrika?
Yes. 1 second.
Sure.
Okay. I copy pasted the links into the chat.
Cool. All right, so let's look at this one first. This is Fern Team.
Yeah. So they are both animation studios.
Cool. Okay. Ooh.
Yeah, and
All
what I
right.
really like there is it's super interactive. And yeah, when you scroll down, like first of all, the play real button appears, and when you scroll down to the work, then you can actually hover and you see a preview of the different videos, and that little Fern logo, when it hits a frame, the color changes and so on. There are just so many details that are animated and happening.
Yeah, there's some really advanced stuff going on with this cursor, making it change size depending on where you are on the page, making it
Yeah.
Implementing your own cursor, if you're just putting in sort of like a very basic one, is pretty simple. Actually, it's not, well, it's not the easiest thing you can do in CSS, but it's also not the hardest. It's pretty straightforward, but making it interactive like this, where it like resizes or displays different things based on different parts of the, sort of like based on where in the page you are, that's a layer of, that's like a really, that's an extra layer of flair that's getting pretty advanced in front end, in sort of front end technique. One thing I'm really interested in is the way that this the way that the text kind of changes color when it's on top of an image, so that it retains a certain amount of contrast. That's really apparent. Like up here, you can see, as this thing kind of like, see how it sort of morphs from black to white depending on what's underneath it. That's really interesting. I don't know how they're doing that, but that's something I'm definitely gonna sort of like keep poking around with.
Yeah, I think they only recently rebranded, so this is like completely new.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, I really like their work, and I also find the website really, really cool and fun to play with.
Yeah, this is like, this is really this is interestingly designed. This is like definitely like just visually interesting to explore.
Yeah.
Okay, so all right, so so the big question, mobile first or desktop first, do you think?
I would say desktop first, mainly because like it loses some of the functions when you switch to mobile version.
Exactly. We have this and it's, again, this one's a little deceptive because it's already a very minimal design, and it could have been done in a mobile first way. Because really, once we zip back out here, really all we have are just these 3 links on the side. We could have that could have been done mobile first, but instead it's sort of like we move into a more straightforward single column layout with a hamburger menu, as opposed to nav links. Cool. So your second page was
That is bug.
Okay. Oh, neat. I like the design right off the bat.
Yeah, the design is also super cool, but I also like how clear everything is. It's like super easy. The menu bar always stays on the left, but it's still like there's some details like the animated logo, that all of that vanishes, and it's like also, yeah, super bold.
Yeah, this is cool. This is very, I forget which font this is, but it's like there's a distinctive look called there's a design trend called web brutalism, where it's sort of like things are in kind of like big and chunky, and use these kind of like large sans serif fonts, and with lots of kind of like sort of like unique, very simple flat design icons and stuff. That's, and sort of like we have kind of these big chunks here, like, and I really like this. I really like that logo animation of the UCK sliding up, and then the B kind of like like spinning around like that.
Yeah.
That's really slick.
Yeah, that is really cool. Is that very difficult?
That particular effect is quite snazzy and probably has what they're probably doing is manipulating a vector graphic, like a .svg file, such as you would work with in a program like Adobe Illustrator. But we are going to talk about, so this particular effect is being implemented probably in a way that's a little that's beyond what we're going to cover in this class. We're not really going to talk about working with SVGs and how to sort of like make, because they can, since it's a vector graphic format rather than a bitmap, you can really integrate web functionality into it in a way that and just like really make the image part of the page. For instance, things like one example that I worked on for a client was building a map widget where within the SVG, if you wanted to highlight different routes, you could just click buttons and on the fly reset the stroke on certain lines within the or certain paths within the graphic itself. So we're not really going to go into working with SVGs, but we are going to go into working with CSS animations, and we're going to go into working with a library that lets you attach those CSS animations to scroll events. So we won't be able to get like, we won't be able to go to quite the level of like bespoke functionality that's going on here, but we'll be able to, but we'll through a slightly different route, we'll still be able to arrive at like triggering some pretty cool visual events on a on scroll.
Yeah, because what I really like here is that it only is animated once, the logo, and I'm seeing like animated logos on a lot of portfolio sites these days, but I find it like very annoying when it constantly moves and there's something grabbing your attention even though you're trying to look at other stuff. So I was wondering if there's like something to turn that off to only have it like
you can set animations to happen only in when certain events occur. So for instance, if you watch here, when I mouse over this, the animation triggers again. But until like there's that scroll event that makes it animate, and there's this hover event that makes it animate. But setting animations to happen, especially on like hover, is one of the easiest one of the easiest states we can apply animations to, because it's very easy to bind in CSS, and it also allows us, we can either perform we can either do a very simple, what's called a transition, which is just sort of, you have a start state and an end state and you just shift between them. Or we can bind a more complex keyframe animation to it. So what's going on here is something slightly different than either of those, because again, this is working with an SVG. So there's some more advanced animation stuff happening there, but we can still set up animations that only happen, that are much more intentional instead of just looping.
Okay, cool.
Let's take a look at mobile and see. Cool. So that animated logo sticks around. All the content truncates to a single sort of like condenses down into a single column, and our sidebar remains exactly the same, except now it's folded into a hamburger. So would you say desktop first or mobile first on this one?
I would also say desktop first. Yeah, because the menu folds down to the bottom into that little hamburger. And also, I don't know, just practicality wise, because
Yeah.
animations, right? You kind of want to look at them bigger, and I don't know, I'm guessing mostly like clients looking at their work and so on. And then it's also more practical to see more stuff and not have everything just underneath each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I agree. You're 100% right. Cool. Okay. Thanks a lot. This was
Thank you.
this was neat stuff. All right. Mai Ting.
Hi.
How's it going?
Great. Give me a second.
Sure.
Um, wait. Wait. Here.
Okay. Oh, whoa. Cool. All right. So let's start with this Baraguan Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really wild. We've got multiple layers of animation happening here.
Mm-hmm.
We're tracking the motion of the mouse. And there's like 3D. There's these clouds appear to be 3D rendered in real time. So this is really crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to try and get below the clouds. It seems like it won't let me go that low.
Yeah, I also tried.
Okay, and then all right, so then each of these
This website that can it's like a podcast
It's called the LA Speed Story, and it was
website and environment, I guess. I kind of like how this designer I think he's a developer and also a director, and so I think it's very. I mean, he didn't really post much work on his website, but I feel like he tells a lot, and you can just have fun with it and maybe contact him for work.
Yeah. So this is right. Yeah, the contact link. I clicked the contact link and it popped open my native email client. So that's and that's really easy to set up. That's just formatting a link in a certain way. There's also this so and yeah, you're right. This info window is like very, very minimal. It just says who he is, and there's and it gives some credit to the audio, and then there's a link out to an Instagram page. Yep. Okay. And then aerospace company. Okay. Yeah, there's a theme going on here. There's a fascination with aerospace. And then this also has there's audio on the page as well.
It was just a story about one day it was really cool being SR-71 pilot. Walter and I were doing a training mission around the United States where you just were building up hours and time, and we take off out of Beale, hit a tanker in Idaho.
Cool. So so this is very, very, very sort of bespoke, intentionally not this almost like sort of like almost more like a miniature game environment sort of in a web page. Let's just refresh and okay, it looks like it's oh, hang on a second. Let me just a second. Let me grab my let me grab the plug for my phone. I want to check on something. I have a suspicion that on mobile, instead of using mouse direction, this is actually going to use the gyros in the phone itself to change the animation. But let me grab my my phone. So so one thing that's worth noting is that if you want to inspect code that's running on your actual phone, on your actual device, you can do that using Safari on your computer. So the process for getting Safari to like for sort of enabling the developer tools and setting this up is way more cumbersome in Safari than in other browsers, which is why I don't recommend using it for the purposes of this class. But just for just later as sort of just like supplemental content, if you're interested in seeing how you can do this, I'll make a little guide and post that in the class materials for like next week's class. But let me head to the device, inspect. Okay, it is not gyros, but it is a touch event. So if I tap, as opposed to sort of like moving the mouse, because you can't really do that on a device. If you just click around, it'll sort of like guide you. The flight path will move in that direction. You know, I'm honestly, I would say this. I don't know if I would classify this as mobile first or desktop first. I think this is kind of its own thing entirely, because this is like, this fits more into the context of like, this almost acts more like a browser game than a, than a traditional website. It does show us basically the same thing on desktop as on mobile. And it does present the information more or less in the same way. But really, really, this is sort of like, kind of like, this is kind of neither one. This is really more a game environment. Very cool. Very, very, very cool page. This one's giving, this one, I like this one a lot. Man, I got to tell you, I love doing this. I love this day of class every semester because everybody brings in so much cool stuff, and I've never seen. I've almost always never seen any of it, and it's always really inspiring. Like this one's given me lots of ideas.
Okay.
Okay. So then we'll look at your other one, anothergraphic.org.
Yeah, I found it functional because it's quite useful for graphic designers to check out poster design that is more about typography, and
Sure.
also it kind of like put everything in colors and designers too. Yeah.
So this is very much what I was talking about, of sort of like this trend of web brutalism, where everything is sort of like, you can see that there are sort of like these big boxy forms, these kind of like either sans serif or monospace fonts that sort of like hint at the design language of the early web or 80s operating systems, without fully emulating that design language. That's definitely a thing that's going on here. And so this is, yeah, okay, gotcha. So this is cool. So we can do either a list view or a, okay. Yeah, I've seen other, and that's cool where it has the this is a little preview pane that shows you the image.
Yeah.
And it shows you that's, if we go back to the grid view, do we still get those colors? We probably do if we click through. Let's see what happens when we click through. Yep. This is really neat. This reminds me of, this reminds me of something that somebody showed in an earlier semester. I'll have to go back and figure out which one it was or what it was. But this is really cool. Let's see what happens when we bring it into. Okay. Aha. So this is kind of another trick case, because it looks like it's going to be desktop first, right? Because we have sort of like what we would normally when we see sort of a bunch of links in the header and footer, is we expect most of this stuff to, once we sort of like once we go down to a mobile size, we are our expectation is going to be that this is all going to kind of like get wrapped into a get wrapped into a hamburger menu or a toggle of some sort. But what actually happens is it all stays there. So we're actually, the only things that are gone are those little sort of quick links out to the, I imagine these are the oh yeah, these are the socials. So those are the only things that aren't visible when we go down to mobile size. And I would imagine that they are, once we scroll to if we scroll to the end of this page, I would imagine that we do see those mobile links or those social links at the bottom. Although this is going to be a very long list, because this is pulling in a bunch of stuff this is pulling in more information on the fly and loading more stuff. It's doing a infinite scroll is what that's called. But wow, this is really cool. That definitely caught me by surprise. Looks like desktop first, but is actually mobile first. That's a new one. That's really neat. Thank you for bringing that one in. That was really cool. Okay. Gabriella. Okay, cool. So okay, so we are looking at the floor plan of the Louvre. Let me Gabriella, I can't hear you. Is your microphone on? Okay. Well, yeah, I can't hear you. If I can't hear you, I don't know if you're talking or not, but we'll step through that. We'll move through this anyway. So we have a oh, there you are.
Wait, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, it was my earphones.
Got it. All right, so this is let's see, how am I supposed to? Oh, so this is just okay. Specifically, we're just looking at the floor plan page.
Yeah, I thought the homepage wasn't very interesting, but I liked the map because you could click on certain sections. You could go by floor and also click on certain sections to see what's in each one.
Okay.
Yeah. I found that it was more for function than for form.
Okay. This is interesting. Yeah, let's take a look. I have a suspicion that this is going to be I have a suspicion that they're doing this with with an SVG, like I was describing earlier, like a vector graphic. Let's just see. Yeah. And yep, that's exactly what's going on here. So so this is a really sort of salient example of the more advanced kind of sort of like interactive image content you can create when you work with SVG images. Because if you'll notice, the SVG image itself is written in a markup language that follows the same convention as XML, as HTML. This is written in a language called XML, which stands for Extensible Markup Language. Which means that sort of the same hover events that I can get, the same mouse over or hover or click events that I can use in regular HTML, I can also apply those to the contents of an SVG. That's how I'm able to, if I inspect this, you'll see it goes down to a specific rectangle element, right? Which is just here to define it, which is just here to define a shape. And since it's a scalable, and since it's a vector image, I can zoom in and zoom out, and the image never loses any fidelity, because all that I'm defining is sort of like the properties of the shapes, rather than a hard-coded image that has to zoom in and out and have certain fixed pixel values. So this is exactly the kind of thing that I was talking about, was sort of like that map widget that I described working on. Exactly the same kind of thing happening here. SVGs are especially powerful for these kinds of tools where you want to sort of like have lots of really interactive image content. And then, yeah, you can pop a sidebar open, and this is all going to be in just straight up HTML at this point. Let's take a look when we look at it on mobile, on a mobile size. I suspect it's going to be a little awkward on a mobile device.
I think it's more desktop. Yeah.
Yeah, it
I tried
definitely
it on
feels.
mobile. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely feels more desktop oriented. Cool, very cool. Yeah, this feels like explicitly a desktop tool that's like sort of like making this work on mobile is going to be a headache. Let me try it. Let me just see what happens if I go to this on my phone.
It's the zooming, like it'll give you more buttons to go around, but it's not as easy as with the desktop.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, it gives you sort of like there's like these right, it gives you sort of like some zoom buttons that weren't there on on desktop, because on desktop you can just scroll. But this really feels like sort of like something that's meant to be used on right. And then once you click on a room, you get this pop-up from the bottom that you then sort of like toggle open. This drawer pops up from the bottom. Gotcha. So yeah, very much a desktop tool. But a neat a very neat demonstration of the power of working with vector images, which unfortunately we're not going to be covering this unit. But I'll point you but like once we're done and once we're nearing the end of the semester and we've sort of got a like more of a grasp of sort of the things that you know I need you to know by the end of this curriculum, I'll point you in the direction of some tools for playing around with vector images, and if that's a route that you want to go in, you can you'll be slightly better equipped to tackle that stuff on your own.
That's cool. Thanks.
Yeah. So
okay.
You had the second one.
Yeah. I'll bring it. So this is okay. This is like a promotional website. There's not really much in it. It's just like maybe, yeah, it's just one page and then it leads to a video.
Mm-hmm.
It's for the Matrix 4. And it's, yeah, you just choose one or the other. then it gives you one version or the other version of the ad.
Got it. Okay. This is, I just for the sake of, yep, all the same stuff
Yeah.
on, yep, because there's not a lot of stuff here. Cool. So then, yep. You get,
And there's the ad.
and it just takes you to one video or the other.
Yeah. You pick one, you get one video, and you pick the other, you get the other side of the video. Like they're different videos, but they're both the same kind of ad.
Sure. Got it. Just, and with the same opening too.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So this is, all right. So you can kind of see.
Do you remember how you got here?
They've done some, all right, cool. So then if you exit out, you just get like to see the full trailer. It's got it. And then when you finish the video, you get a prompt to share it.
Yeah.
Okay. Neat. Very, very simple. Definitely would qualify this as mobile first. And yeah, they're working with so we'll poke around a little bit with working with video as well. Just so that like sort of like because what they're doing here is really they're not even navigating to a different page. What they're doing is popping open a video player and loading a video into it so that you never leave. See, this URL never changes. So it's so you never actually navigate to, this is the only page you stay on for the entirety of this site. And it just like loads different assets on the fly. So that's a little outside of what we're going to be talking about doing. But we will talk about how to work with how to embed videos into pages, how to turn them into backgrounds and stuff. And once we get into JavaScript, again, this is something where sort of like if you're curious about implementing this kind of functionality in your own work, I can point you. Once we've covered the core of our curriculum stuff, I can point you in. I can give you point you in the direction of some resources that'll help you pull off these kind of effects.
Yeah, cool.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so then Daphne, and then we're done here. Oh well, or rather, and then we move on to the lecture portion of the class. Okay, mcachicago.org.
So the first one, I just like the design.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one is just an example of an Etsy shop, which I like the functionality of.
Okay, cool. So, okay. So right off the bat, there's a lot of stuff on the on the homepage here. We have like a very, very populated side nav. We have a pretty populated top nav. And then as we scroll down, there's kind of like these tiles of stuff. So let's take a guess. Is this going to be mobile first or desktop first? We've been surprised a few times in this over the course of this class. So let's I'm definitely going to guess mobile first or desktop first here. I'm definitely going to guess that a lot of this stuff is going to get sucked into sucked down into menus that you toggle open. And that's exactly what happens. So, yep. This is a nice design touch. I really appreciate just the big horizontal text of the word menu as opposed to using like an icon. And I like that these sort of pills at the top have actually remained, and that we've kind of formed like something of we have like a bit of a header sort of comprised by this also working it's sort of in concert, like this menu alongside these pills, the 4 letters, 4 rows, or 4 rows of pill content. That's pretty neat. Yep. And then as expected, this all kind of all like things that were in rows all pop down into a single column. Once we get to talking about once we get dug in with CSS a bit more, there's going to be a class where we're going to spend a day talking about specifically just the flexbox and the grid, and which are two slight, like I brought up grid a little earlier, the grid display mode. Between that and the flexbox display mode, these kind of like very fluid changes in layout, where you go from, you know, 2 rows of 4 to 1 column to 2 columns, etc., etc. Those changes in layout become much easier to work with once we're using tools like the CSS Flexbox. So it looks like a lot to make a layout do that, but it's not as much as you think. It's still, you know, CSS is not easy to learn. It's a thing that kind of like it's a language that that can be very frustrating, because it wants you to think in a very specific way, and it can be hard at first to get your head into that place. But once you figure it out, and once it starts to make sense, a layout like this is not as complicated as it actually looks. So let's but with that said, let's take a look at the Etsy page. So okay. All right.
And yeah, what I appreciate, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was gonna say what I appreciate about this is just like all the functionality. Like I feel like they have added a lot of like search and browse functionality on one page and made it look very simple.
Yeah, the design concerns of setting up a good storefront are so specific. And so think about the variety and breadth of content and or of items for sale on a storefront as mammoth as Amazon or eBay or something like that. Being able to there within the e-commerce sector, there are people whose entire job is just to be taxonomy experts and figure out the best way to categorize stuff. And it's always, and then that sort of like leads down into very specific design cases. I mean, I'm sure we've all had the experience of sort of like trying to there was a thing I did at a competition years ago, rhizome.org, which is like a net art nonprofit group that's that operates out of the New Museum. They hosted an event that was sort of like a bunch of net artists put this thing together, where the competition was to they called it a web surfing competition, and you had to start on one web page and navigate to another web page with no keyboard and no browser history buttons, and the only way you could navigate was by clicking outbound links and moving from one page to another page. And one of the things that we had to do as the qualifying round was Amazon speed shopping, just using their browse links to just shopping by category. And it was one of the most frustrating experiences of my entire life. It was also extremely fun, but it was really, it sort of like shed a light, the whole experience kind of shed a light on like you know, just how if those kind of tools aren't working the way we want them to or expect them to, it can just make the experience of trying to find something without if you eliminate search, trying to find something becomes awful, you know? So so sort of putting even here we kind of have, you know, we have categories that are like sort of you know, that are kind of like specific to the storefront we're in, but then you know, they've handled this in a completely different way than any other, like, you know, that's very tailored to what they're to the patterns of their customers. So like if we click through into here, yep, we get, okay, so we get, okay, that's a nice touch, even just sort of like adding that little bit of bottom border at the end of the last item so that we know, just to make it very clear that sort of like, okay, you're drilled into like, you know, you're drilled into a specific category, just to sort of like reiterate that in the display of the actual sort of little category browser itself. And then we have a bunch of these. When there's more of them, it looked like the okay, yeah, so it always displays the same size. But here, okay, when it's all of them, okay, I see. It's showing you a few. Got it. Okay. It pulls featured items and shows them at the top and then goes down into all items. Okay. That's interesting. Let's take a look at how this shrinks down to mobile size. My guess is this is already pretty simple. My guess is that once we get down to, but I might be, and I'm 100% might be wrong about this, but my guess is that once we get down to mobile size, this search bar is going to be hidden and you're going to have to toggle it open. But don't quote me on that. Let's see if I'm completely wrong. I am. Okay, cool. So the search bar is still visible, but what's in this? Okay.
I also appreciate how they have like they differentiate between the site search and the search items.
Yeah. Even just the way that this search bar has a different border and search for anything versus search items, like little touches like that. Okay. The way that this this category browser kind of like changes. All right, so I'm still gonna, yeah, I'm still definitely gonna call this desktop first, because sort of we're still on desktop, there's all of this information is immediately visible, where once we go down to a mobile size, you have to toggle it open. That's but this is, yeah, this is interesting. I think I've bought stuff on Etsy once in my life, and it was a very long time ago. So I definitely have not been like, you know, keeping up on what their store looks like, but there's some really neat design choices going on here.
They also have pagination both for the products and the reviews, which I feel like,
okay, where do I
like one of the, I think on desktop it might be easier to see.
Sure.
Yeah, if you scroll down, like the reviews have pagination, and then as you go up, then the products do too. So that's like a good way. I feel like they're nesting a lot of content on one page.
It's true. Yeah. So this kind of thing, we will not sort of this is getting into functionality that's like way outside the scope of the size of the kind of pages we're going to be making in this class. We're going to be making, little personal pages, some, that could go anywhere from 1 page to, 3-page sites, but everything is going to be static content. In the case of setting up pagination like this, you are they're using a protocol called AJAX, which is asynchronous JavaScript, which or at least that's what the AJ stands for, which allows you to load more content into a web page without reloading the entire web page. If at the end of this class you sign on for coding 2, well, that's something I'll cover in that course. But suffice it to say, sort of like, we're not going to be building anything big enough to require pagination, but we are going to cover how to set up image carousels. So there's a, which is slightly which can feel like a pagination type interaction. So, but you're right. This is nifty. Even sort of just the way that they've designed, like, the indicators at the bottom look one way for product pagination and look another way for review pagination. That's an interesting little touch. Cool. Okay. Tell you what. Let's take 10 minutes. You can get up, get a glass of water, whatever you need to do. And in 10 minutes, I'll start up on today's lecture. Okay, we all back? All right. Cool. Okay. All right, in that case, jump into our lecture, which will include and be followed by a code demo. So today we're going to start with, we're going to start going into more detail about HTML itself. So what is it? We covered this briefly last week. We did a kind of like just an overview of what what HTML does, what JavaScript does, and what CSS do, and sort of what their roles in the context of a web page are. But just to sort of reiterate, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It defines, this is the file format that we use to define the structure and the content of a document on the web. And bear in mind that when I say structure here, I don't mean layout. I don't mean, positioning of elements and stuff like that. That's all handled by CSS. I mean, just in terms of, think about this like a print document and that kind of structure. Because, and I say think about this like a print document because it's all derived from the conventions of print document layout. The web was originally created back in 1989. The web was created to make it easier for scientists to share academic papers with each other. That's all HTML was ever initially meant to do. It spec'd for 1989, 1990. It ran on it only ran on a handful of computers operating out of the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. It was literally for astrophysicists. This means that when it was initially built, HTML was built very, very simply so that print documents like research papers could easily be laid out in a way that was in a digital format that could link and documents so that those documents could then link back and forth to each other. Let's quickly talk about naming an HTML document, because there are actually some specific conventions at play here that can define whether or not how your site is going to work. So first of all, HTML files should be named all lowercase letters and numbers, no spaces, and avoid uppercase letters. It won't break anything to use uppercase letters, but it's just sort of like, it's poor convention. It's poor penmanship, basically. You can use underscores or dashes instead of spaces. So, page-1.html or page-2 or page_2.html, but not page space 2.html. The file extension should always be .html. As you look around the web, you may see examples of things where the page doesn't have a file extension at the end of it, or where whether it's just sort of like wikipedia.org/article name, or maybe it's maybe the file extension ends in something else, something .php or something else. If the file extension doesn't end in HTML, it's probably not written in HTML. If there is if there's not a file extension at the end, then that may be a specific case which we'll look at, which we'll cover in the next bullet point. But when you're creating your HTML files, always the file extension's always .html. You'll need a file called index.html in the base or root directory of your web page. And this is what will serve as your home page. Say mycoolsite.com. When you what's actually loading is mycoolsite.com/index.html, but it just doesn't have, it just expects that index.html is going to be there. So you don't actually have to, so it doesn't show it to you. I'll show you in more detail how this index.html naming convention works. But if you change the name of your index.html, it's going to throw off navigating just to the root page of your site. Say you change it to, say you make a page called home.html or something, you're only ever going to actually see that page if you explicitly navigate to mywebsite.com/home.html. If you just go to mywebsite.com, it's going to show you, it's just going to show you a list of the contents of that root directory. By default, at least. I'm talking about default behavior. You can go if you're more versed in full stack web and you really want those specific kinds of naming conventions, you can go in and create things called rewrite rules that'll sort of like perform redirects and stuff. But that's getting into like server configuration stuff that we're not going to come anywhere near touching in this course. So just for the purposes of these 12 weeks of web dev curriculum, you always need a file. Your home page is always called index.html. So inside an HTML document, we've done a little bit of looking at markup. We've done a little bit of looking at stuff in the inspector, but most elements consist of three, what we call a normal HTML element. And there are exceptions to these, which we'll talk about in a second. But your bog standard HTML element is going to have three things: a start tag, an end tag, and content in the middle. So the start tag includes the name of the element. So here in this example, we have the name of the element, P, which stands for a paragraph. It's always going to be surrounded by angle brackets. Any HTML element is going to have a start tag, which is the name of the element surrounded in angle brackets, and then an end tag, which is the name of the element surrounded by angle brackets with a slash ahead of it. The start tag also contains what we call the attributes of an HTML element. In this case, we have an attribute name, an attribute called class, and a value of foo. In computer programming terms, foo is just a placeholder. It's like a lorem ipsum of the computer programming world for things like variable names, or anytime you just need to plug in a value. You'll see foo and bar and baz and bot are kind of like the most common ones you'll see. But in this case, we have an attribute of class with a value of foo. Attributes can an element can have more than one attribute. So an element can have a class. It can also have, let's say, in the in the case of a media element like an audio or video player or something like that, we might have attributes to say whether or not that piece of media is going to autoplay, whether or not it's going to be muted, whether or not it should loop, et cetera, et cetera. So we can have many attributes on an element. Some attributes can have multiple values. For instance, class here, an element can have more than one class. So it would just say class equals foo space bar space bat, et cetera, et cetera. And then it would have all three of those class names. Certain attributes can only have one value. For instance, the ID, and we'll get back to that when we talk about when we get more into sort of talking about CSS, because these are the ways that you connect the class and the ID are the way that you connect CSS, are two of the things you can use to connect a CSS rule to an HTML element. Sometimes an attribute will be what we call read-only. For instance, like I was talking about with those media elements, where is it looping? Is it is it muted? Are the controls visible? Should it autoplay? Those are all yes or no conditions, right? And so in those cases, we can just put in what's called a read-only attribute, where it doesn't have the equals and the value in quotation mark. And we can say, so if I have a video element and I add the attribute of autoplay, just by adding the attribute of autoplay, it's the same as saying autoplay equals true. And whereas by just not including the attribute of autoplay, it's the same as autoplay equals false, and so on and so forth. But so then, so that's the start tag, and we'll come back to the particular. We'll come back into a lot more detail about the particulars of what specific attributes are available, how they work, and when you should use them. But that's just sort of like a top level overview of the kind of things you'll see. So this is our start tag, the name of the element and any attributes we might have. After that, we have our content. In this case, it's just the words, this is a paragraph. The content can be more HTML elements. This is how we build up that nested structure of sort of elements within elements that you see when you look at the source of a web page. Is that and this is sort of part of what makes this part of the power of this language, is that we can just build stuff. We can build things sort of very detailed presentations of information just by virtue of how we nest elements inside other elements. And then we close it with the end tag. The end tag consists of the name of the element surrounded by angle brackets, but with a slash after the first bracket. If you put the slash after the name of the element, it's not going to work. It always has to be after the first bracket. So that's the normal HTML element. Start tag, content, end tag. There are some exceptions to this. There are elements that we refer to as raw text elements. And the only exception here is that a raw text element can't include any nested HTML inside of it. It can only be text. Big example here is the title attribute. This of your web page. The title attribute of your web page is the text that shows up in the top of your browser bar up here. You can't put any more HTML inside it. You can manipulate it using JavaScript, which is a fun thing to do that we might poke around with towards the end of the semester, but all by changing the text characters that are popped up in there on the fly. But you can't actually put anything other than just text in one of these elements. In practice, the title attribute's probably the only thing you're going to see. More likely, more often than that, you're going to run into what we call void elements, or sometimes they might be called one-line elements or something like that, because these do not include, these don't have content or a closing tag. It's a single tag. And before the closing angle bracket, there's a trailing space and a slash right before the closing angle bracket. This is something you're going to see. It might be called a single element, a standalone element, an empty element. But this you're going to see a lot of, because this is the kind of thing, for instance, an image tag is set up like this. An image, when you embed an image in a document, it's a single or one line element like this that then has a source attribute where you plug in the path to the image file, but it never actually, but you don't start and end you don't start the tag and then put the content in the middle and then end the tag. It's a one-line tag and you add stuff in its attributes. We're also, so the image is sort of like the classic example of that. The other one you're going to look at is the line break. This is it's a common newbie move to rely on the line break for all of your vertical spacing in your document. I understand the temptation to do this, but please do not do this. If you want vertical spacing in your document, we'll put it there with using things like padding or margins or positioning rules once we get into CSS. So if you do end up using a bunch of line breaks to add vertical space in your document, just know that you're going to go back and edit that out later and replace it with vertical space implemented using style sheets. But it's exactly what it says it does. It's a line break in a big chunk of text. So say you have I don't know, subtitle text or something that needs to have that has very specific line breaks that need to be in certain places, but you don't want it to be spaced like separate paragraphs. That's where you would use the line break. There's also comments, and these aren't quite actually, it's a bit of a misnomer to refer to a comment as a type of element, because it's not. A comment is something that exists in any form of programming language, which is there so that you can insert text that is not meant to be executed, or so that you can define ranges of text that should not be executed. They'll still show up in source code, but they won't be rendered when the page actually loads. And these exist in all of the languages we're going to talk about. There are comments in HTML, there are comments in CSS, there are comments in JavaScript. I'll demonstrate the usefulness of them once I get into the code demo section. But you're seeing a comment in HTML when it opens with an angle bracket, an exclamation point, and 2 dashes. Anything from this opening between the opening comment and then it closes with a dash right angle bracket. Anything between those characters will still appear in source code, but it will not be rendered in the browser window. So it's there for this is really handy if you're trying, comments come in really handy as you're working and want to try things out, and say you have different chunks of code and you're not sure which way you want to go with a certain problem. You might have it written one way and have that in comments, and and then sort of leave it there because you don't want to delete your work, but leave it there in comments so that it doesn't render, and then try moving another way. That's a very common case in programming. So let's talk a little bit about. So we talked about how sort of like one of the things that makes HTML so powerful as a document structure tool is nesting elements inside each other, right? This is what we call the parent-child relationship in HTML. So when one HTML element is nested inside another, we refer to the outer element as the parent and the inner element as the child. So in this case, I have a section tag, and inside that section tag, I have a paragraph. Section is the parent, paragraph is the child. You may see parent elements, immediate parent elements may also be, or actually even not just immediate parent elements, but parent elements are also get referred to as containers. Though container those terms, sometimes you'll see those terms used interchangeably depending on whose documentation you're reading. But container has a slightly different connotation that we will that's more specific to CSS that we'll talk about once we start talking about document layout conventions, specifically CSS document layout conventions. Although it's important to note, if I had multiple paragraphs in the, say I had, section, paragraph, paragraph, section, the two paragraphs next to each other at the same level, we would refer to those as siblings, and they would have the same parent. If there was more content nested inside this paragraph, the containing paragraph would be the parent, and then the section would be referred to as an ancestor. So you can think of using that sort of parent-child terminology. You can continue the metaphor in terms of sibling relationships and sort of grandparent or hierarchical ancestral relationships. That's the terminology that we're using that's the terminology we use to describe nested content in HTML and describe which one is contained and which one is contained within which. So by default, there are two ways that say we're building an HTML, say we're building a web page completely from scratch without using any CSS. There are two default modes of display for an HTML element. There's sort of like there are more advanced or there are more specific modes of display that go beyond these, but by and large, sort of all of those all modes of display will fit into either block or inline mode of display. So what is it? What's the difference here? When we refer to a block element, this is an element where by default, it always starts on a new line. It takes up the full width of its parent or container. So if it's just at the root level, it's going to take up the whole width of the page. And it can be given a custom width and height. A block element, you could think of the web page as sort of like a bunch of Legos, right? And you're setting Legos on top of each other to kind of build a tower. Every time you start a new line of Legos, every time you sort of like add a new one on top, and it takes up a new line, and then imagine that you can customize the size of that given Lego piece. That's basically the way that block elements work. In contrast to this, inline elements are designed to reside within a line of text. So they function. So they have very different properties. They begin and end within a line of text. They only take up as much space as is necessary for the content inside. So rather than taking up the width of the container, if you have, say, a paragraph, for instance, an example here would be a paragraph where one of the words is bold-faced. That bold, the word that you want in bold, you would wrap in a tag or an element that just specifies it as bold, right? And that doesn't, and that behaves totally differently than a block element because it stays within a line of text and it only encompasses the content inside that element. So say, say we have, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times on a web page, and the words best and worst are bold-faced. Surrounding each of those would be a tag that denotes those words as bold, and those would be inline tags because they start and end within a line of text and only take up the space of those of the word that they are bold facing. They do not, you cannot give them custom width and height, but they respond to typographical rules. So you can set text alignment. You can set, left, center, right. You can set line height, which is how much space does one line of text take up. You can set font size, font weight, font style, any kind of typographical rule. Because that's all it's meant to do is just call out a single, like a word or span of words in a chunk of text and style them differently. Now, one thing you're probably going to hear referred to a lot is semantic HTML. You should write semantic HTML. You'll see that in other tutorials around the web. If you go for other tutorials around the web, you'll hear it from me too. Semantic HTML. So what does this mean? What are we talking about when we talk about semantic HTML? It's really very simple. It just means that the name of the element describes its role in the document. So really some really straightforward ones. Paragraph that we've been looking at. P, paragraph. The name of the element says what it does. That's a semantic element. Section is another one we've seen. The name of the element describes its role in the document. That's a semantically named element. So for instance, sections are a common one you're going to see. Paragraphs. We're also going to see headings. We have H1 through H6. So a header at basically, you can think of this as like the heading and then one overall heading and then 5 subheadings on your page. H1 should be the headline or title of the page, and it should only be used once. It won't break your HTML. It'll still render, but it's bad form. It's think of it in the case of like you're laying out a research paper or just a magazine article or something like that. You only have one title, right? Then your different sections of your article are going to have subtitles. That's where so then H2 through H6, you can repeat as the subtitles of your various subsections of your document. Anchors. Anchors are the clickable hyperlinks in your document. I like to point this out because there's a separate element that's where the name of it is link, but it functions differently. And so the reason that it doesn't, and so it can be sort of, why is a link called A? It's because it stands for anchor. This can be a clickable hyperlink to either a spot in the same page or a different page on the internet. So for instance, big example here on a Wikipedia page, there will be that table of contents that's like, the ordered list of sections of the page. And when you click on one, it jumps down to that part of the document. That's the exact same. It's the same tag as it's the exact same tag as a hyperlink that would take you away to a different page. The only difference is just in how you write the attribute, whether you put an external web page or not. But yeah, but again, the link tag works completely differently. The link tag is for linking we use it mainly for linking a style sheet to our HTML page. Not the same as an anchor, but it's just confusing because anchors actually, we refer to anchors as links in, colloquially. So I just always like to drive that home just to try and avoid any confusion here. So those are some examples of semantic elements. There's many, many, many more than that. Every time the HTML spec gets updated, we get more stuff gets added to it. So it's been a few years since the last time HTML is updated, but there's, that's just an overview of some of the common ones you're gonna run into. There's way more semantic elements than that.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for like paragraphs versus sections, would you have to like start a new section in order to put a paragraph? And for like headings, like do you have to start a section before you put the heading?
Yeah, so basically this will make so sections are much more top level, right? So say I have again, let's use the content the example of a magazine article. The section is going to be something really top level, like the sort of like the masthead, or maybe not the masthead, that would be in a different place, but say there would be a section that's got like sort of like main content. Within that you would have potentially any number of articles, and then within those articles you would have paragraphs and headers and things like paragraphs and headings and things like that. So basically this will once we jump over into the example code, it'll be a little clearer. But basically, yes, you're pretty much going to, it's pretty much it's a best practice to wrap things in to sort of like organize your document into sections. It'll make it easier and it's a best practice for two reasons. It'll make it easier for you as the developer to read through and tell what goes where, especially as a page gets filled with more and more content. It becomes a lot easier to jump between chunks of it if you have it sort of like organized into sections. And then by the same token, if it's more easily human readable, it's more easily computer readable. So it ends up affecting your SEO rating, because this one of the things that affects SEO is the semantic structure of your document. Because in order for a search engine to crawl your page and index the content, if it's written in semantic HTML, the crawler can sort of like get through that process a little faster. It helps that process along. It also, in some cases, it can even help with accessibility concerns, as in like sort of defining which parts of a page might draw the focus of a screen reader or something like that. But really, for the purposes of this class, don't worry about the SEO. You don't need to worry about the SEO part as much. Just writing more well-organized, semantically structured code is going to make it easier for you to read. And so as your page gets bigger, it'll make it easier to work with as you go on. I feel like I kind of rambled slightly off of the actual thing you asked, but I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. So semantic element, so if we have semantic elements that we specify, these are the semantic elements. This implies that there is an opposite, generic elements. Generic elements do not convey any specific meaning about their content. They're kind of more blank slate type elements that you then that don't imply a certain role or a certain function. The one we're going to see the most common here is the div, which just stands for division. And this is just an empty box that, like I was talking about, of sort of imagining a set of Legos where you're stacking them on top of each other, and you can customize the the size and the width and height of those elements. Div is your bog standard blank Lego. It's your 2x3 Lego brick, in plain white, or maybe, I don't know, some colorless beige or something. Just exists entirely as a container with no predefined connotation about what it needs to do. So it's there entirely for you to have custom implement whatever custom functionality you need it to do. There's also a span, which is the same thing except inline. The span is, like I was talking about, say, in the context of taking a chunk of text and making certain words bold. There is a specific element for that. There is a semantic element for that. It's B, which just stands for boldface. The span, say you want a certain line of text to be, or say you want you have a paragraph and you want a paragraph of text, and say you want, the worst of times in that paragraph to be italicized and highlighted yellow. There's no specific tag for that, right? There is a specific tag for italic, but there's not a specific tag for highlighting it a certain color. That's where you use a span. It's a certain, like say we want to, or say maybe not, let's not worry about italicizing, but say we want to change the text color blue and highlight it yellow. We can put in a span and then use CSS to target that span and change that property. But since that's a bespoke functionality that we create, we need just a generic wrapper element to apply those styles to, since there's not a semantic one. So this is another way to think of it, is if there's not a role for what you want it, if there's not a semantic element that fills the role you're using, you use a generic element and you create the role yourself.
Are you going to show us examples of how these work,
Yep.
On screen? Okay.
Yes.
I'm having kind of a hard time imagining this.
Okay, I think it's actually my next. Okay, yeah, I think I'm just going to talk about a couple more things and then we'll jump over to it. So there's also certain elements that where for the most part, with normal HTML elements, we can pretty much nest anything inside anything else. But there are certain tags that imply a specific parent-child relationship, where a specific parent needs to have certain children certain direct children in order to render properly. Biggest examples here are going to be lists. So we can write ordered lists, which will with the OL attribute, which will, and then when we put elements inside, they'll be numbered 1 through however many we have. There's also unordered lists. This will render a bullet list. In order for these things to render properly, all the child elements need to be, there's also description lists, I'm sorry, which give you sort of an element, a title and a description. So there's actually 2 children that go with each one, or with each item. But these only render properly if they have, very specific child elements. The OL and the UL, the ordered list and the unordered list, need to use the LI, the list item element. Otherwise, you won't get that bullet point or you won't get that numbering. Descriptive lists need 2. You get the description title and the description detail. So I think after this, yes. Okay, so now we're going to look at some of this in action. So I got to reload the page here. Let me just kill this. So here, let's talk, for instance, let's just sort of like go down line by line. First off, we always open with the doc type declaration, and we always open with the HTML tag, and the document's going to end with an HTML closing tag. Then we have the head. Notice that there are certain elements nested inside the head that never show up in the body. Last week I brought up that the head is where you put information for the browser to read about the page, not anything that you want to be human visible. So here we have a bunch of meta information. For instance, the character set of UTF-8, the language of English, and the viewport meta tag, which tells us to not to resize this to fit on a mobile screen. Remember when iPhones first came out and you would go to a page on your smartphone and it would show you like a shrunken, a super zoomed out, it would try to fit the whole page onto a smaller screen. This is the tag you put in that prevents that from happening and allows you to actually build responsive pages. And then we have our title. And so at this point, we haven't gotten to anything that's visible in the browser window yet, right? There's a couple links to style sheets, and I've removed them. But I've removed them in comments because I don't want to delete them completely from the page. I want them because I'm going to bring this back next week, and we're going to look at what the same HTML looks like with CSS styles. So I want to leave them there, but I don't want them to take any effect right now. So if I go, and here's what the page looks like. So I have, so if I inspect it and go into the head here, you can see those comments are there, but they don't take effect, right? These elements are grayed. These tags are grayed out, and they don't actually do anything, but they're not deleted from the document. So now let's just sort of like go through this bit by bit. Let me do this. So from the outermost part of the page, I have the body, then I have a section. I have the header. There are header and footer tags as well that should connotate not the same as a heading, not the same as a heading, but the header is like the masthead of your page, and then the footer is the footer at the bottom. But notice that we start with the header, and when we're zoomed out to just looking at the immediate descendants of the body, notice how easy it is to sort of parse what's what in this page. We've got the header, we've got a section of content, we've got another section of content, and we've got our footer. So let's drill down into these a little further. We have a link at the top of our page, an anchor, I should say, at the top of our page. It just says Pokemon. Then we have a nav. This is another example of a semantically named element that you're going to see. It's becoming common practice to take a to use the nav element to just indicate where your navigation bar is. So within that, I have an unordered list. And you'll notice that these things have classes and IDs. Those are going to come into play more once we actually start adding styles to this. But so within the ordered list, I have 3 list items. I have an article, or I have the one that links to article. I have the one that links to projects. I have the one that links to people. So notice that the href attribute, that rather than pointing at another document somewhere on the web, I have this paragraph here, this week's lecture slides. You can see this one points at https:// This points to a different place on the internet. If I click it, it takes me back here to the slides for the week. These just have hash article, or like, you know, it looks like a hashtag, right? Like hash article, hash projects, hash people. So these are internal links. But how do these internal links work? So let's do this to explore that a little further. Let's start by jumping in here to this first article. So I have a section, and within that, I have an article. Notice that it has an ID of a certain that says article. So this is how internal linking works, is if I click on this link and its hypertext reference, its href, is set to hash article, what this is going to do is scroll the page to, it's going to scroll down the page and find and stop once it hits the element that matches this ID. So if I click article, it scrolls me straight to here, to the top of this element with the ID of article. Within there, oh right, I had an externally hosted image that's gone at this point. Let me do this. We'll use this as an opportunity to just pull this back up. Okay, cool. This one's a little cooler anyway. So you can so let's look at the way that this image tag works. I have it set to host an image from somewhere else on the web. That image is gone. This is one of the things that happens when you link to external resources, is you can't control when they disappear. So there are two things I can do in that case. I can either replace it with this new one. So now my image's source, and again, notice this is a void element or a single line element, because I put the path to the image, in this case, which is hosted on another web page, which is hosted on another server on another web page, in the source attribute. I use the alt text attribute the alt text attribute does two things. It's showing me both. Well, now it's going to look, but it's showing me both the text that shows up if the link is broken, but this also doubles in the event that if I were using a screen reader, the alt text is what the screen reader would read out to me when I mouse over the image. It's descriptive text that describes the image that we're showing. I'm using a width attribute here, just for the time, but that's take this with a grain of salt, because just in the same way that I described, in the same way that I described inserting white space by just adding lots of line breaks. Daphne?
Yeah, I have a question
Sure.
when you have a minute, just like,
Sure.
what's the difference between an article and a section?
Our article has a more specific connotation. That article is going to imply several paragraphs of text. Section can imply any different, is more general in its definition. It's just sort of like, it's literally just a section of the document. So I have, a section for this article. I have a section for, you can see this isn't, this section doesn't have as much straight up just chunks of text in it, right? So it's just a more, it's just a less specific region of your document, if that makes sense.
The section is?
Yeah, the section is pretty much just any section of your document that's distinct from other sections of your document. The article has a specific, the article implies that it's going to be multiple paragraphs of text.
So it's kind of like one piece of content versus like a region.
Yes. Cool. But so with the but so you might see width and height declared in attributes like this. This is I left it in here because the whole point of today's class is that there's no CSS in here, but this is a very old way of doing this. This is a very Web 1.0 GeoCities Netscape Navigator way of writing your HTML. In practice, in practice, by the time we're done with this class, I don't want to see you putting width attributes on things. I want you to see you doing that in CSS. But again, it's just here for the sake of showing what showing it would look like, showing what it would look like if we weren't using CSS at all. Now, just for the sake of demonstrating something here, let me do this. So I added an image. Let me do that. Let me just save this for a second. So I added that image to my document, and it should be showing up. Yep, it's there, but it's externally hosted, and that is kind of that's a little volatile. If this page ever goes down, I lose this image. So what I'm going to do here is just go to Glitch's, upload a file, click upload. I think I can actually also just drag the file in, now that I think about it. Let me try that. Oh, right. Hang on a sec. Sorry, when I saved it, it saved as a Webpack image, so I have to sort of take a circuitous step here. Okay. So now let me put this in here. Yep. So I can just drag and drop. I don't know if you saw what I did there. Let me switch the share to my whole desktop for a second so that it's a little easier to see. So what I did here, I'll delete this and I'll do it again so that you can see. So I'm just dragging and dropping, and it uploads. And then, okay, and then I can click on this image, hit copy down here, and now I can paste that in here. So now, functionally, it's going to look basically the same, but the difference is that now this is my copy of the file. And so if this one that I looked up that I found elsewhere on the web ever goes down, it won't affect me. You shouldn't do this unless you have unless it's a unless the image is licensed to be copied. This is a thing that you shouldn't actually even externally link to an image in your page unless it's licensed to be copied. So just make sure that you when you do your Google image search, just make sure that you have the that you go to tools and search usage rights Creative Commons. So I'm going to plead, I don't think that Nintendo is going to come after me for this or anything, but that's a best practice, especially if anything is going to be done, is going to be for commercial use. Anyways, so then we have an H1. It doesn't show up until here, but we only have one of them. We have multiple H2s. I have an H3 in the next section. Here's a detail list or a descriptive list. So you can see that it has that down here. These are external links, but I have, description title, description detail. And then down here at the end, in the H4, in the footer, H4, other sites that I like, and you can see that this is an unordered list, and so these render as bullet points as opposed to numbers. So things to notice. This is going to reiterate a bunch of stuff I just said. I'll speed through it. Doc type HTML declaration at the top. Always have to have this. Glitch sets it up for you, but if you're starting a new document from scratch, you got to remember to include it. Tells the browser what kind of document it is. It can infer, but it's a best practice. Indentation of code. Notice that every time I start a new level, I indent the code. So you can see that section lines up with section. DL lines up with its closing tag. Here you can see that section lines up, it's indented the same. Article lines up, it's indented the same. This is something this makes your code a lot easier to read for you, a lot easier for read to me, a lot easier to read for anyone and anything that it may ever need to read it. So this is something I'm going to be a stickler about, is making sure that your code is properly indented. Tabs indicate the parent-child relationship, right? It's because if I didn't have these indentations, it would be a lot harder to just glance at this and see what my hierarchy is. But since I've paid attention to properly indenting my code, it's very easy to look and see what's a parent, what's a child, what's a sibling, right? It all reads very intuitively. In the head of the document, we had the meta content, the page title, and the style sheet links. Nothing here shows up in the browser window. If you want things to be visible to your humans, you put them to humans, you put it in the body. In the body, we divide into descriptive blocks where the name of the element tells us what the content inside is. We have our header. Within the header, we have the nav. We have a section which contains an article. We have a section which contains some other information that's not an article. And then we have a footer. You can ignore the JavaScript it includes for now. So we have the header and footer. We have the section and we have the article. And oh, is there an aside in here? There is an aside. So aside would be like a sidebar or something like that. And sort of like, oh, it might be gone. I might have deleted it by accident. Sorry about that. But that's another type of, that is another type of, here, tell you what, it'll be visible in the page that I copied, that I based this code on, which is on CSS tricks. But so, Right. Okay. I think, yeah, I changed this to a section instead of an aside. But basically, aside would be like either sort of a sidebar, or in the context of a print document, this is where, sort of like there might be in the context of like, say, a magazine article, there might be a little box with sort of like some bullet points at the bottom or the side of the page. That's what the aside implies. I have the nav, which just tells where my internal navigation is. Here's another big one. Special characters are properly encoded. I did not pick Pokemon as the example here just to be cute. I picked Pokemon because it includes foreign accented characters. And if you're going to include foreign accented characters in your document, and especially I figure I have enough European and non-English speaking students that this is something that could come up. If you're going to include accented characters or special characters like that in your document, you cannot actually just type it, it is not a best practice to type the word Pokemon by just going, like that. It probably will render right, but it is just not. But it's a best practice to invoke the HTML entity for that character. Imagine that I was writing out here, and I'll give you a more concrete reason why. Imagine I was writing out a math problem and I wanted to write, let's say, 6 is less than 8, or something like that. Can anybody guess what the problem with writing this is going to be? This angle bracket indicates the start of an HTML tag. So if I try to just write it in my document like this, it's going to interpret this as HTML and it's going to break stuff. At least it often, browsers catch and correct these kind of errors a lot, but it's still, if I was using, say I was writing in a template language, say that I was writing in Ruby or Python or PHP or something that was going to end up rendering into HTML. This could writing a character that's also part of an HTML tag declaration can throw some problems. So we would need to use the properly encoded special character for that. There's a bunch of them here. And right, yep. So less than they're always going to be basically the same format too, of like of the ampersand, and then a term, and then a semicolon. So here I've written, so here it's like, I wrote the accented E by writing ampersand E acute semicolon. In this case, I'm going to write ampersand LT semicolon. And the biggest ones where you're going to run into the one where you're probably most likely to run into this actually is the ampersand symbol itself. The ampersand is part of the character declaration here. So you have to encode it itself as a special character. So if I want to say 6 is less than 8 and 7 is less than 9, I would write it like this. So this is just this is one of those things where sort of like at the level that we're working at with just static HTML files and sort of like very simple or relatively simple beginner level technology, there may be it's probably going to catch it for you, but it's better to get in the practice of encoding these properly now in case it becomes an issue later on down the line. Yes, Daphne.
So for the list of characters that are allowed, is that all in that link?
Yeah, this includes so this link includes a pretty exhaustive list of elements that are going that you need to encode. And you can see it goes it gets pretty thorough. But pretty much anything that you can't just sort of like, if you can type it on the key, with the exception of the left and right angle bracket, if you can type it on the keyboard using just like shift and whatever key, it's probably fine, unless it's like clearly part of a separate of an HTML declaration itself. You know, your less than and greater than symbol, angle brackets, or your ampersand. But pretty much anything else, as long as it's like, you know, just on an American or on an American or English keyboard, because Tim Berners-Lee was an English guy, and so he built this spec to the keyboard that he used. Again, there's a lot. There's like, this is there's a very there is a distinctly all across computer science, there is a distinct bias towards American and British conventions, because it's Americans and English people that built most of the technology that this is all based on, going back to the 50s. So, for instance, people who are I have friends that are native Arabic speakers. They have to code in a second language, you know, because everything's built on English and usually American English conventions. So that's stepping off the soapbox on that one. Basically, yes, if this page has pretty much all the special characters you could think to run into. So then that's it for today's class. For next week, oh wait, actually, I'm sorry, there's one more thing I want to show you. I talked about the importance of naming pages with index.html. Let me just show you. So here I have a domain. My page exists at pmcg316 week 2 basic html.glitch.me. If I change this page to home.html and reload this, notice how all I get is just a list of the documents in that folder. This is what an index looks like if you don't have a page declared for it. So this is why you need to have an index.html file, because see, it works again if I click to home, but I don't want to have to do that. I want it to just be my home here. So I have to rename this back to index.html. And also, just for the sake of showing you how multiple pages work within a website. I know I'm running right up to time here, but this will take I have 3 minutes, so I'll do it in 3 minutes. Let's just say, let's just grab a picture of Pikachu. So let's add another list item here. So I added a page for Pikachu. And as long as index.html and Pikachu.html are in the same root folder, I can link to it just by putting the file name. As long as everything ahead of this file name is identical, all I have to put is the file name. So now I can go through and, okay, it's a broken image, but still, you know, I'm going to Pikachu.html. I'm going to my Pikachu page. So that's the way that you, I know it's real quick to throw that in there. We can touch on it again next week if it needs a little further clarification. But if you're going to set up multiple pages in your site, that's the way you do it. You have one index and that's your home page. And then you just add more .html pages for the other pages you want to add, and you just link to them. If I made this, oh, right, I have to, okay, never mind. I can't create folders in here, or let me see if I can do it this way. All right. Right. Okay. So let's just say, like, this is all it's going to be, right? Don't really need anything. If I want to, have that clean no file extension at the end naming structure, notice that what I did here, and I know I'm touching on this right as class is supposed to end, but I made a folder and I put an index.html inside that folder, right? So now index.html refers to the contents of this folder rather than my root folder. And so that's one way that you can get that clean URL structure just entirely using basic HTML. Okay, so for next week, go to Glitch. Go click the new project button and click Glitch Hello Website like this. It'll spin up a new web page for you with a placeholder page. Just when it creates the page, it generates a random title. So just change this. Something like that. Just make sure to change that so that it's just to something more descriptive, just so that it's like your name, like your last name and the week's assignment, or last name - week 3 assignment or something like that. Just so that it's easier for me to sort through and see what's what. Add one image, add a few paragraphs of text, add one link to an external site. Basic requirements there. If you want to go a little further than that, try out a little bit of the semantic markup we were talking about. Add a couple, at like say organize your page into a couple of sections, have, say, I don't know, say your page is about fish. One section could be different species of fish. Another section could be, a time you went fishing, something like that, But content, as I like to say, this is not a content creation class. You can just fill the page with lorem ipsum text if you want to. I'm less concerned about, what you put in your web page, and more concerned about just that you know how to do it. So I apologize for keeping you hanging on a few minutes late here. But I will let you know when I will let everybody know when the video of this lecture is uploaded, and I will see you next week.
Wait, is the homework posted somewhere, or?
I'll put it in. So I'll share the Google Drive with you. It'll have these slides in it, but I'll also, like, when I send out the email later tonight to confirm that the video uploaded, I'll just reiterate what the assignment is in a class-wide email.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye, thanks.